Okay.
All right. Let's do it. All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Washington Wednesday. My name is Jocelyn DeYoung, and I serve as the Senior Associate Director of Admissions for Recruitment and Communications, and I'm joined by my colleague who's waving, Paul Seegert. Do you want to introduce yourself, Paul?
Hi, yeah, I'm Paul, and I'm the Director of Admissions at the University of Washington. Welcome.
So tonight is just the two of us, and we're going to be talking about our decision to move to test optional, or test no longer required to apply for admission. And but before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. We will be recording this session. We're doing things a little bit differently, and we're just going to spend the time answering all of your questions. Many of you submitted questions in advance, and we'll be working through that list, particularly as you upvoted the ones that you were most interested in. And but before we get started, I'm going to administer a survey really quickly, and it should be coming up on your screen now. And we just want to get to know you, so we have a better idea of who the audience is and speak to that experience. So while you're doing that, I'm going to pop over, Paul, to our questions that we did receive that are still being upvoted, which is awesome. And the number one question that we're getting right now about going test optional, that some colleges will say that they won't require the SAT or ACT, but will still use it to consider the. Is that true at the UW?
Okay. Well, we are not going to be considering the SAT or ACT score at all when we review applications. When we review applications through our holistic review, where we take lots of factors into consideration, but for the academic portion of the review, it's really primarily the courses that you're taking and how you're doing in those courses, and SAT and ACT scores are just simply not going to be there. We're not even going to see them if you send them. Now, we are, the reason that we're saying that we're technically test optional is because, so what we're going to do is, after we've reviewed all the applications and we've determined what students we're going to offer admission to and which ones we're going to invite to our wait list, we're going to take a look at those students that are in that wait list category, and we're going to see if there's any students who sent scores that are really standout scores, really high scores, and we're going to take another look at those applications. It doesn't mean that necessarily anything will change, but we think in a small number of cases, we with that additional information that will with that second look, that re-review of the application, that it could make some differences there on the margins. So so in that small number of cases, we are going to take a look at some applications with the scores, but that's at the very end of the process, and we expect that to be a pretty small number of applications that we're going to do that with.
That's great. And so the follow-up to that, which you probably people can figure this out, but the question is, are ACT, SAT score submissions still accepted? So the answer to that is obviously yes, we are still accepting them. And the follow-up is, if so, how much will they be evaluated along with the rest of the application? So Paul, just to reiterate, the readers, when we're reviewing applications, will actually not see if scores are provided at all. So that initial look at the file, we won't have that. So right, can you maybe reiterate your plans, though, with the, maybe we could, for the audience, just provide a little bit of context, right? So out of 45,000 applications, we typically offer 20 to 22,000 students admission, and we invite anywhere from, I mean, I've been at the UW for 5 years, and it's been small wait lists, and some years it's been bigger. Maybe you could give a little more context.
Yeah, say it's usually, let's say, about 2,000 students in any given year then that we're inviting to our wait list. So so students that are in that in that category, not quite offered admission, students who are invited to our wait list are really good students, and we're close to being offered admission. And it's those students where we're going to look to see, are there some students who have who sent us scores and have really high scores, or even high grades. I mean, we'll do that with grades too, just standout grades, and then take another look at those applications, and that's how we're going to be considering those scores at the end of the process for that much smaller number of applications. That's the only time that we're actually going to be looking at some test scores, and that'll be a pretty small number of test scores.
Now, Paul, this wasn't asked, but I think it's a good point of information for those who are watching. What constitutes a good test? What would we consider high that would warrant that look? Sure.
Definitely above the middle 50% score. So basically, it'd be a score that's in the top 25% of score senders, and we can are we able to send a link to that that information so students can see historically what that's been. These are pretty high scores. I mean, these are typically around 1,400 and above scores. So they're pretty high scores that we're talking about, and so because we at that point we will have already made most of the admit waitlist decisions, and we're just looking to see, are there a few students that we should maybe pull up from the waitlist into the admit category. We're only using scores in a small number of cases to pull up some students. We're not going to pull any students down. It's not sending scores, or sending scores that are low scores are not going to negatively affect an application at all.
That's, I don't know. I don't know if that was my internet or yours. Might be mine. Oh. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Did I break up a little?
It's probably me. Okay, moving right along though. We're back.
Okay. Okay.
I'm going to go back to so just a quick note. I cannot send a link to everyone who's watching this right now because we're live streaming. We're doing a couple different things. However, for those of you who want to look at our profile, you can go to admit.uw.edu, and we have a freshman profile available on the site. So if you Google freshman by the numbers, it will come right up. So we'll give you a breakdown for Washington residents and non-residents as well. Okay, so let's continue on with the questions that were submitted in advance. And Paul, can you provide an example of how application components, so let's say this person used GPA, but I'll add grades in particular courses, essay, etc., will be weighted with or without the SAT. So I think we've already established won't be looked at with the SAT. So there's no weight in terms of that piece. But can you talk a little bit more about that holistic review and the academic components that go into that review process?
Sure. Yeah. So just in case you're breaking up a little bit, I'll kind of repeat some of the questions. So yeah, I'm just gonna for sort of context, I'm just gonna give an overview of the academic review and application. So and kind of the components that we consider. And so the main elements. Well, first of all, there's an academic part of the review and there's a personal part of the review. And I'll talk a little bit about both, but I'll start with the academic review. So the academic part of the review is elements that we consider would be the courses that students take, how well they do in those courses, your grades in those courses. Now, of course, grades are a little wonky now, for last term, and they might be for the next coming term or two. And we will take all of that into consideration. Prior to grades being wonky because of COVID-19, we will look at those the way we always have, and we're just going to look at the performance in all of the courses that students have taken and the trend in performance in courses. Are you getting really solid grades and continuing to, or are grades declining, which is a concern, or are grades improving, which is always good to see. We also look at just the senior year, and we look at what courses you're taking your senior year. Now, we don't have grades for senior year courses. I mean, we never have. I mean, that's not unique now because of how early students have to apply to the UW. With the deadline is just on November 15th, so you wouldn't even have grades. But you will know what courses you're going to take the fall term and what courses you're probably registered for spring term, and you self-report those, and we look at those. So we want to see, are you continuing to challenge yourself taking college prep courses, and those are actually the components. I mean, that's really what we're looking for. The personal statements and essays, that is considered in the personal part of the review, in terms of, in that part of the review, we're looking at what have you achieved, what have you been involved in, what have you had to overcome, what obstacles maybe you had in your education, and both of those go into an overall review of the application. But I'll say there is one part where what you write can have an effect on the academics, in that if there's something that you need to explain because there's something in the application as you're filling it out, it's maybe you're not able to describe fully how the grading scale changed, or there's something complex and something that changed, especially because of COVID-19. Maybe there was a class that you would have otherwise taken that now you can't take because it's not available. Well, that is something that you can explain. And there's a part of the application. There's actually two parts that are just considered other information parts that you can explain those, and that's some additional context. But really, the bottom line for the academic part of the review. And the academic part of the review is really that really drives the decisions more than anything at the UW. It's the courses that you're taking and the grades in those courses and the performance in those courses, and are you continuing to challenge yourself the senior year? Those are the main parts. The test scores, when we considered them, were a smaller consideration than any of those other factors. So it was already a really small consideration, and we just pulled that out. So that's the overview.
Yeah, and I think that's important to know, because I don't know that necessarily a lot of the families and the students that we work with realize that it was that small piece of a larger puzzle. Let's talk about direct admission. There's some programs like computer science. All of the College of Engineering does direct to the college. We have Foster School of Business. There's some programs that are highly capacity constrained that folks are wondering, is it going to matter if they have the test score? Will that be a factor in consideration for not just general admission, but direct admission to those programs? Can you speak a little bit to how that process will work?
Sure. Yeah, test scores will not be considered for freshman admission into majors either. For computer science and computer engineering and all of the engineering programs, those are the programs where freshman admission is the primary pathway. That is when students are applying as freshmen. That is when you're admitted to those programs, not later on. And for those programs, the admissions office makes the decision not only for general admission, but also admission into those departments. Again, computer science, computer engineering, and all of the other College of Engineering, so the admissions office is making those decisions, and we're using it, and we're basing those decisions off of the same holistic review that we're using for everybody, that we're using for admission. And I just described what we do. And test scores are not going to be considered, so they're not going to be considered for those. Now, for some of the other departments, like business, Foster School of Business, for example, that where they do admit some freshmen directly, although that is not the primary path to business and some of those other direct to major programs. It's nice if it happens, but it's not the primary pathway. Those departments, they make their own decisions, but they make those decisions based on information we give them. We let them know students who are interested in their programs that we're admitting to the UW, and then they can select the students that they want. But test scores are not going to be part of that for those departments either.
Right. So another question that we're getting, and I can answer this one, is related to the timeline. So as everyone is aware, we removed the requirement for 2021 primarily because of the lack of available test sites. It wasn't safe, still not safe, or we don't want to encourage students to take the exam. But we also removed the requirement for beyond 2021. So I know we have some juniors that are watching right now, and that is a question that's coming up, and that requirement has been permanently removed for future applicants as well. Another question, Paul, that we're getting is related to scholarships. Certainly, students are very concerned, families are concerned about having being considered for scholarships. So can you talk a little bit about admission scholarships and what we know about university scholarships and how test scores will or will not be used?
Sure. The main scholarship for freshmen is there's a scholarship for non-resident students, U.S. non-resident students, called the Purple and Gold Scholarship. That scholarship, again, it's administered by the admissions office, and it's based on the holistic review scores. They don't include test, so test scores are not going to be a factor. And what I mentioned about at the end of the process, students that a small number of students will reconsider scores. Who those students that are not being offered admission on our at the end of the process, we're about to invite them to the waitlist, but we're going to take a second look at some students with higher scores. That small number of students, those students actually wouldn't be in a range that would be offered the Purple and Gold scholarships anyway, so that just wouldn't affect them. So there are no scholarships that we know of on campus that anyone would use test scores for, we're not aware of every scholarship on campus. We don't think that there are scholarships that anyone would be using test scores for, and we're trying to make sure that nobody does. It's possible that there's a small scholarship out there in some department that we're not aware of, but we're trying to just get the word out that departments shouldn't be doing that. But anyway, the main scholarships, the ones that we know of that the admissions office gives out, or the honors program gives out, their test scores would not be considered.
I really think this is an important question because it again reiterates that every university is handling test optional in different ways. And this question is, will a student have to submit an SAT or ACT score if they are accepted whenever they are able to take the test? So in other words, if it's not provided but we admit them, is that going to be a stipulation or requirement to enroll?
It would only be a stipulation if you were one of those small number of students that we took a second look at your scores and I mean, we probably would already have the score at that point, and so we probably would already have it. It would only be the case if that was based on a self-reported score, that then we would need the official score. But we would let you know if that was the case, and it's going to be in a very small number of cases. The rest of you, no, you don't have to send the scores, and we're not going to require later on that you send official scores. If you do, that's great. I mean, some of you were invited to this program tonight because you sent us test scores. I mean, that's how we know that you're interested in the UW, and so they still. I mean, even if you're not one of the small number of students where it makes a difference at the end of the admissions process, it still is a way, for you to signal that you're interested in the university. We're able to still use those scores for research purposes, to have information on the students that come here. For federal reporting purposes, we have to report data on our new classes, their GPAs and their test scores and things. So we're still going to use it for reporting purposes. We're still happy to have them, It's nice. It's nice for us for those other reasons if you send them. But again, there's just absolutely no reason to send them for admissions purposes. You just don't need to do that, especially this year, this COVID-19 year. We don't want anybody to take any risks to send scores for the UW.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because in rereading the question, that was part of it was to take the test when they were able to do so.
Oh.
Not a risk at all.
Not a requirement. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
This was also.
Could I just add, just because some of what I said. So there's two ways that students can send us scores. I mean, one is sort of the traditional official way that their official scores are sent from the testing agency. Some students have taken the test, but when they're filling out the application, they just write in with their scores. Those are self-reported scores. Those are unofficial scores. And those are both ways that students can send scores. And so just when I mentioned if we used a self-reported score and it sort of helped to lift a student up into an admit range, and it was based on a self-reported score, well, then we would need the official score. And I just wanted to let students know that there are those two ways that students can send scores. When I mentioned that some of you sent scores, and that's how we knew about you to invite you to this program, those would have been official scores that were sent.
Good. Okay, and switching gears just a little bit and talking to those students who are watching, our parents, family members who are doing homeschooling, or you attend a school that has a non-standard grading scale. So in other words, you're not getting a letter grade, you might get a narrative kind of response about your performance. And this person asked the question, test scores are objective assessments of home self-school learning. Will they be given weight in that context?
Okay.
So do you want to talk about 2022 and beyond?
Yes, yeah. So for 2021, we're not requiring scores for students who are homeschooled, even students who have non-standard grading that are come from systems where it's a non-standard grading system where there are not letter or number grades. We're just not going to require them because we just don't want any students to be taking any risks this year. But next year, we assume that things will be more back to normal. And students who are homeschooled, yes, we are actually still requiring the test scores for those students, and I hope that actually will be welcome by those students, because in my experience, homeschool students are usually happy to send test scores, and so we will consider your scores. That's just a way to have that additional piece of information. And then students from schools that have non-standard grading systems, in other words, that don't provide grades. They don't provide number grades. They don't provide letter grades. They're just narratives. When that happens, we ask those schools to send us grades, and if they do, that's fine. We'll use the grades. But if they don't, then we need something to go on, and so then we do require test scores. If your school's not going to provide grades, well, then we need test scores. That's a really small number of cases, and you probably know who you are if you come from a school like that.
So this is an interesting question, and got a few upvotes, but I suspect there might be others in this case. This particular person has sent us their test scores already, pre-pandemic, and fully anticipating that they would take the exam. This person said two more times, which of course we would never say take it that many times, right? But they were hoping to, because that's something that we've done in the past. They're now asking, can they be removed from their file? Would they submit the application? What was your response to that?
Oh, okay. Well, they will not be in your application file. So they will not be added. They are not going to be. They will not be seen by our application review readers. So they're not gonna have an effect at all. So yes, we we have the scores, and we have that data, but that is not going to be included with the application that our application reviewers see.
Let's see, I'm just going through a few more of these before we go to the live questions. Honors program, though they may not be required for general admission, are test scores required for consideration in the honors program?
Right.
I can answer that.
Yeah, not for, oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't sure if you knew the answer. I think you do, but yeah, no, we did a session on this just 2 or 3 weeks ago, but no, they are following similar pattern as what we're doing, and they will not be looking at the score, and so they lean pretty heavily on their holistic assessment, which includes the essay response and academic factors. I will say too, we have a link. They have some videos. We have the recorded session we did with honors from a couple weeks ago available on demand if you'd like to watch that, as well as we have an FAQ page just on test scores that answer all the questions that we're answering right now related to scholarships and capacity constrained programs, direct admission, etc. So check that out. Let's see. Just getting more questions about scholarships. Paul, I know you went over that once, but maybe we could, I know people are logging in and logging out. I'm going to pull up the other live questions right now, if you would.
Sure, yeah. Test scores will not be considered for scholarships either. They, most of the scholarships are offered to freshmen are based on the holistic review and that we do, and the holistic review is not going to, we're not going to be considering scores for that. So, yeah, they just will not be considered.
Okay, so switching gears just a little bit, do you want to tell the story about why we don't accept letters of recommendation? Getting some questions around that.
Okay, sure. Yeah, letters of recommendation. There's a couple reasons we don't consider letters of recommendation. One is an equity reason. It's that there is the ratio of high school counselors to students is a pretty dramatic ratio at a lot of schools. And some students go to schools where it's just not as easy to get letters of recommendation as at other schools. So there's a fairness issue there, and then and another reason is that so fairness to the students, and then another reason is that it's a burden to those that write the score. I mean, it's a burden to people that have tried to get the letters, and then it's also it's also a lot of work to already overworked teachers and high school counselors. And it didn't seem fair to us to consider. I mean, we just felt that with those letters of recommendation that we should require them of everybody or nobody, and it just was because of for equity reasons and because of workload reasons, we didn't think it was fair. But in addition to that, we did an experiment before we made this decision, and we read. We read many applications without letters, and then we reread them with the letters. And what we found was that they made almost no difference at all. I mean, we're already asking the students to write about their lives, write about their achievements, write about their challenges. And they do that. You guys do that. You do a good job of that. And we really want to hear that from you. And the letters really just tended to reiterate what the students already wrote. Well, you can write that for yourself. So they didn't make a difference, and they're a lot of work for you and for your teachers and for your counselors. So why require them? And there's a little bit of that in the test scores too. I mean, we found that test scores really are not a very good predictor of success at the UW, they've become less and less and less predictive of academic success at the UW. What we found is that the other elements really are a better predictor. So considering that, and that's why we didn't consider test scores very much in the past either. And so we were considering them, we're giving them very little consideration. But it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of it's a lot of work, and it's money, and so why do that? Why have that requirement when they don't make much of a difference anyway? So we just decided we'd try to make it easier and remove that requirement.
Okay, we have a lot of questions. I just want to say to everyone, if we don't get to your question, we have, I can see your name and email of those who submitted, and we will be following up by email. So let's get through a few more of these here in our 30 minutes remaining. Question about submitting the test score after November 15th. For those of you who know, November 15th is our freshman application deadline, and yes, you can submit them after the 15th. You do need to submit them by December 31st. That is the test score deadline. Just really quickly, AP scores. There's some questions about, will AP scores have more weight in the process? And AP scores are never seen by an application reader. So I wouldn't see that you've taken an exam. I would see if you've taken a class, because you would self-report that on the application, but we don't see, readers do not see scores. I really appreciate this question. We talked a lot about the wait list and how maybe if you submit your scores and you're in that upper 25th percentile of a test score of our admitted students, that maybe we might look at that before we make final decisions as to who gets invited to the wait list. And this question was how about the percentage of students that we admitted off the wait list. And Paul, I can't remember off the top of my head what our policy is to provide the previous 2 years statistics when we invite you to the wait list. This year was a little different because of the pandemic, and we weren't really sure what enrollment was going to be. So we went pretty deep into the wait list for some groups. Do you recall?
Yes. And there's just. And really for context, I mean, there's years, as I think Jocelyn was kind of saying, I mean, there's years where we've admitted hardly anyone off of our wait list. And then there's years where we've admitted a lot of students off of our wait list. And so for those applying in the future, there's no way to know whether, next year is going to be a year where it's a lot or few. And we do admission different by different residency groups too. So if you're a Washington resident, you're applying for, we have a certain number of spaces for Washington students. And then if you're a U.S. non-resident in another state, you're applying for spaces for non-residents, and for international students or spaces for non-residents. So in the end, we enroll about 4,450 Washington residents. We enroll about 1,400 U.S. non-residents, and about 1,200 international students. And so because we admit a lot more Washington residents relative to non-residents, it tends to be, things are a little bit different. The admit rate tends to be higher with Washington residents. It tends to be more competitive, a little bit more competitive for non-residents and international students. There are differences. And then there are also differences with the wait list. Those are separate wait lists for us. And so sometimes there might be one, like Washington residents, we might make initial offers, and then we end up lower than we expect with students who accept that offer, or higher. And it's when we're low, then that's when we make waitlist offers. And so this last year, for example, we ended up with a lot of Washington residents accepted our offer, and we made very few offers off of the wait list for Washington residents, very few, because students we offered, they accepted a lot more of those students than in the past accepted the offer. probably understandable. A lot of students wanting to stay closer to home. U.S. non-residents and international students, it was a very different picture. We made initial offers. Students were accepting at a much lower rate. So we actually made quite a few waitlist offers this year. And I don't expect that. I don't expect that to happen next year, because I'm hoping things will be sort of back to normal, and we'll make kind of a normal number of offers, about a normal number of students will accept. But you just never know, and that's why we have those wait lists, because if there is space, if we make offers and then not as many students accept, well, we want to be able to give that opportunity to somebody else. So yeah, it's just really, it's impossible to predict from year to year. There's just no way to know what's going to happen.
Okay. So I want to just recognize, I know people are coming in and just popping in. So just to recap, readers will not see test scores if you provide. So really what we're talking about, and why we're kind of focusing on the wait list, is that it's a small number of students who do provide test scores, who fall in that upper 25th percentile of score senders from our profile from the previous year, that we might take another look before we decide to invite to the wait list versus potentially boost them up in admit. So no, there's a question about PSAT scores. We don't have a place on the application for you to report your PSAT, unfortunately, so that's not something we can consider. Yes, you absolutely can send us your scores after you've submitted the application. Again, the deadline is November 15th for the application, but you can send your test scores up until December 31st. Paul, I know we're switching gears a little bit, but there is some question around deferring admission, and if we expect admit rates for the upcoming year to be different because of deferring admission for the students that will be starting.
Sure. Well, I have some good news for those of you who are applying for next year, for the incoming class of 2021. We did not offer deferrals to students this year. We understand that the school year is different for students who are starting college this year, but they're still able to start college, and so we just required students to accept on the conditions, and we understand that, like I said, our number of initial acceptances was lower than usual, and that's understandable. Some students made different decisions, but we did not allow deferrals. And the reason we did not allow deferrals is because that would have made it more competitive for all of you who are applying next year. And we just didn't think that was fair to move those students, to have those students take spaces that you guys are going to be applying for. So that is not going to affect admit rates for you who are applying for future years. And at this point, we really have, there's no reason to believe that admit rates would be much different. I mean, we expect to, I think, offer a similar number of students, enroll a similar number of students. The one thing that might be a little bit different would be wait list. I mean, I think this year, like I said, for non-residents, it was still more competitive for non-residents than it was for Washington residents, but it was a little less competitive than it has been in previous years for non-residents. I would expect that in the future that will be a little bit more like it was 2 years ago. Admit rates for non-residents. Washington residents, I wouldn't expect as much, very much change. Really, I think it'll probably be similar. I don't expect huge differences in admit rates next year.
So Nellie's asking, when you say that tests will not be considered for direct admission to engineering or computer science, do you mean that they are not required, or that they will not be looked at? And Nellie, we mean both. They're not required and they will not be looked at. So no direct entry program will be utilizing test scores to make admissions. They will not see those scores, and it will not be. Another question around Ruby saying, why would you not be aware of the scholarship? Does the admissions office not control scholarships? And Ruby, I'm glad you asked. We do control some scholarships, but we don't control all of the scholarships. So Paul shared earlier that to our knowledge, we've checked with the financial aid office. They have a scholarship division. We know certain partners, certain academic partners that do scholarships, they are not utilizing it. We are not utilizing it. But like Paul was saying, there are some small little scholarship programs out there that we might not be aware of that might still be relying on it, but we're doing our best to get that message out, but that information is not going to be available. And that, let's be honest, we're in a pandemic. Students can't take the exam. It's a safety and health risk. Next question, if both of your test dates were canceled, do you recommend that we take the SAT this October? I would say no. I don't recommend that you take it. But Paul, what do you say?
No. Yeah, I do not recommend that you take the test. Not for the UW. I mean, my understanding is that most of the universities are also not requiring the test and are really genuinely making sure that it's not going to harm students to not take the test. But absolutely definitively can say for the UW there is just no need to take the test. We do not recommend it.
Lily is asking, if I get waitlisted, could I send in a score I took after the deadline? And we haven't talked about this, Paul, but my response would be no, because the test score deadline is December 31st, and we make waitlist decisions in March. When that wouldn't line up. So some more questions around that. Just to reiterate, for those of you who joined us, AP scores are not a factor in our holistic review process, so that's not going to bump you up or be considered at all. What the reviewer is going to see is if you've taken an AP course. Now, we recognize there are students that take AP exams without ever having taken the course because that might not be available to you. I'm also seeing some questions from students who say that those types of courses like AP and IB are not available to them in their classes or in their high schools, and that's fine. I don't want you to feel like you're at a disadvantage. It might be something you want to address, however, in that additional space section so that we have a little more context when we're reviewing your application. But AP tests are not something that we are considering. All right, sorry, I'm just trying to look through these. One other question that was coming up around if we were just test optional for residents, but it was still required for non-residents. Paul, do you want to talk a little bit about that while I keep perusing all these questions that are coming in?
Sure. Yeah, there's no difference for residents or non-residents. I mean, everything we're saying is for both. Sometimes there's some confusion about English language proficiency requirements for international students, where they normally take the TOEFL or the IELTS. That's still required English proficiency requirement, but that's different than what we're talking about with the SAT and the ACT that are required for U.S. non-residents from other states and for Washington residents.
So Megan is asking, will admissions look at SAT scores if a student's grades are not the best?
Well, if they're high, but only if they're super high. Only if they're in that, somewhere in that top 25% range. But conversely, we'll also do this with really high grades. If you have a really high grade, we'll take another look at their application. Now, I'm not saying that's going to guarantee that somebody would be moved up from waitlist to admit just because they had a really high test score or just because they had a high GPA or high grades. It would. We're going to take another look, and then and then with the scores, another look, knowing that the scores are high. But it's not an automatic there still could be other good reasons to still keep a student like right where they are as a waitlist invitation. So I also want to just make sure students know that it's not a guarantee even for those small number of students. It's just signaling us to students that or signaling to us that is an application that we want to take another look at. And so typically, where it might make a difference would be a student who where there aren't other concerns, and maybe for example, maybe it says you're a strong student. We can see that from the test scores. We can see that from the grades. But maybe you just didn't have as many opportunities at your school to take as many college prep courses or something, and then the test scores would be some additional information about the strength of your preparation, something like that. So yeah, it's just another look that we'll be doing.
So another kind of, again, lots of questions, so thank you, and we will get to all of them. We will personally respond to your questions via email. We don't get to them this evening. But a general theme, Paul, is, will X, enter whatever. Grace is saying specifically, do extracurriculars matter more since SAT and ACT are required? But we've also had comments about, will essays matter more, or volunteerism, or et cetera. So can you kind of explain the philosophy around it's not really creating this gaping hole in terms of
Sure.
the puzzle?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So again, and some of you might not have heard that the overview, but even in previous years, test scores were an extremely minor consideration. It was by and large we were considering, or the dominant factor was courses, and then after that would be grades and courses, and then strength of the senior year and trend in grades and courses. SAT, ACT were a tiny, tiny, tiny portion of the consideration. So by taking that out, what it's doing is it's just making the courses, it's just making those other things a little bit more important. Now the academic review, and this can be really hard to understand, and I understand it's kind of a complicated process. But the academic review is a separate review from the personal part of the review. And the personal part of the review is where we are looking at activities that you've been involved in, leadership, challenges that that you maybe had to overcome. That is a separate part of the review, and then we take both of those things into consideration. Well, this is not changing the personal part of the review at all. It's only a tiny change with the academic part of the review. And like I said, since we weren't considering test scores very highly at all it's doing is making those other factors, the courses, the grades, the senior year, the trended grades, it's just making those a little bit more significant. So I guess so really what we're hoping is that instead of spending time preparing for the SAT or the ACT and taking time out of your day and maybe retaking it and re-preparing and retaking it, is you take that time to study a little bit more, to try to do a little bit better in your courses. And you know what, that advice actually would have been good advice actually all along, but it's even better advice now. Just focus on your courses and your performance in the courses.
Great. Anushka is asking, can I submit SAT subject tests? We haven't talked about subjects, but no, those are not considered or used or reviewed at all. So, in fact, if they're sent, I don't even know. I've never seen a subject test on a student record. I don't know what we do with them.
They're in our database, but we don't do anything with them. I mean, they come with the data along with other test scores, but we do nothing with them. We don't consider them out.
So Leah summarizes pretty well, but she says if you don't have scores to submit, it won't hurt you, but could it possibly I guess that's a question, but could it possibly help your chances if you have them? And again, I would say it could, but it's going to be a small number of students. So again, if you haven't taken the exam and you're trying to get in, I see several of you are trying to, you've had to reschedule twice now, and you're now coming into the December 12th exam date, and you know, we don't know what's going to happen in December, so that might also be canceled. But I just wouldn't put the pressure on myself if I was in your shoes to try to get into that December date if that's what's available right now. At least not, like Paul was saying, for the University of Washington.
That's right.
Let's see. We have 10 minutes left, and just a quick overview, because we haven't really talked about this, but there have been some questions about kind of what does that timeline look like. So our application for admission is open for freshmen, and we use the coalition application. It's the only way you can apply to the University of Washington. 80% of our application is shared, and it's a part of the profile. That is open. I know we have juniors watching. That is open all year long, so you can start to put in those pieces that make up the profile, which is 80% of the application. That remaining 20% of the application, which are University of Washington specific questions, and I should say the Seattle campus of the University of Washington, because our Bothell colleagues use the coalition, but they have separate questions that you'll need to answer. That opened on September 1st, and that deadline is November 15th. So after November 15th, you have until, if you have the test scores and you want to send them in, you have until December 31st. After the application closes and through until, mid-February-ish, depending on how many readers we have and how many applications we're reading, and we're doing all the things, preparing to then select the class. Notifications for admission go out March 1st through the 15th. They are randomized. They don't all happen on the first of the month. It's a window of time. We do our best to get them out as quickly as possible. And then students have until May 1st to accept their offer of admission. And at the point of admission, you'll know if you're admitted to computer science, if that was your first choice requested major, if you're admitted to engineering undeclared, which means you're admitted to the College of Engineering. And you'll also know if you're not admitted to the program. To be considered for direct admission, we talked a little bit about this tonight, but just to reiterate, you do need to list that first choice major. So if you're interested in the Foster School Business needs to be your first choice major. If you're interested in computer engineering, that needs to be your first choice major, or computer science, etc. So that's all you have to do. If you list it as a second choice and something else is your first, you won't be considered for direct admission. And it's very difficult for us to take requests to make changes. So by the time you apply, be sure that you've got to kind of figure out what you want to put down. So that's kind of what's happening over the course of the next 9 months or so. Throughout the fall, our admissions counseling team, your admissions counselor, we're doing all sorts of virtual events. So you can meet us at a virtual college fair. Sometimes we might be virtually visiting your high school. We have, you can make an appointment with your counselor. You can do Zoom or a telephone call or whatnot. And we're happy to connect with you. You can also find your counselor on our website if you want to reach out to them individually, ask a question, of course, for more specific. Okay, so I'm wrapping up here. Again, do you want to reiterate just more questions around, if there will be greater weight given to one thing over another in the absence of test scores? Paul, do you want to just share that again?
Yeah, sure. The things that will get greater weight will be the college prep courses that you're taking, and how well you're doing in those courses, your grades in those courses, and trend and performance, and your senior year schedule, how much you're continuing to challenge yourself. And I will also say, understanding that grades are wonky right now because of COVID-19, that first of all, I'll remind you that, or just let you know, for those of you who are seniors this year, we never see senior year grades when we're reviewing applications. Our deadline is November 15th. We don't have senior year grades. We're only, for the senior year, we're only looking at your schedule. And then if you're admitted and you choose to attend, well, then you send an official transcript over the summer, and we check that to make sure that your performance was adequate. So for those of you who are seniors this year, it's the spring term of last year that would have been wonky, and we are going to take all of those grades with a grain of salt, and we're just going to focus on completion of courses for that term. But we'll have all the other years, 9th grade, 10th grade, your first term of the 11th grade that we're going to look at normally. But yeah, without test scores, we're just going to look at the other factors, which were always the primary factors: the courses and the performance in the courses.
So Lemire is asking, is the academic or personal part of the application more heavily weighed?
Yeah, okay, that's an interesting question. So for the vast majority of you, it's the academic portion. Academics drives the admissions decisions for the vast majority of students that are offered admission to the UW. For a small number of students, the personal is actually more significant. Now, for everybody who's offered admission, I mean, they have to have a certain amount of academic preparation so that we're confident that they will be successful at the UW. But there's some students whose academic performance is solid, but they maybe not maybe not quite what it is for some other students. However, they've overcome a lot in life. Maybe first generation. Maybe go to a school that doesn't have as many resources. Maybe moved a lot, and you've just had a lot of challenges in life. There are some students who have really overcome a lot to do as well as they have had, and for that smaller number of students, well, then the personal factors can make a huge difference. And then in terms of for everybody else, the personal factors are really a much smaller part of the review. So I know that might be kind of confusing, but I think kind of the take-home message would be, for most of you, yeah, those things that you're doing in school, those are considered. They're a small part of the decision, but by and large, it's the academics that are driving the decision. For those of you that maybe your grades aren't maybe in our middle 50%. I mean, maybe they're a little bit lower, but you've had to overcome a lot. Well, that can make a difference. We're able to take that into consideration, and that shows up in your achievements and challenges, and that can make a difference. So that's the description I think I can give in the last couple of minutes here.
Right, and I want to answer this one. We got 2 minutes left. If next year ends up being, I like that there's quotes on this, normal year, we're very hopeful for, do you think that readers will start seeing test scores again, especially for direct admit program? Are we on a break, or is this kind of the new normal?
This is new. We are not going to be what we're doing this year. The only thing that's different, as I mentioned earlier, for homeschool students and students that come from schools with non-standard grading systems that actually don't provide grades, not this coming year, but for the incoming class of 2022, will actually require test scores for homeschool students and students from schools that don't provide grades. It's a really small number of students. But other than that, for everybody else, yeah, what we're doing this year is what we're just going to be doing from now on.
Okay. And I think we got, I want to answer Dominique's question. Do we need to send our first semester senior year grades as soon as they are available? And the answer is no, you don't. for a small, I don't know, handful of students. Sometimes we do request them because we want to see how you perform before we make any final decisions, but it's a very small number.
Yeah, and we reach out to you. We send you an email and ask you for those.
Yeah.
But that's
Great.
a small numbers. Okay.
We made it. We have a lot of questions that, like I said, we'll be following up with you all via email. So thank you for your time. We're here to help. If you have more questions, let us know. But thanks for joining us. And this will be available on demand in, we'll have a link to it from our Washington Wednesday website. Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
And have a good night.
Bye.